Welcome back to another edition of Real Spiritual Talk Radio. I am your host, Lamont Gates, once again bringing you the world of faith, metaphysicality, and spirituality. Today, my guest had an experience that completely opened her mind to the concept of spirituality. Joining us today, ladies and gentlemen, is near-death experiencer Alisa Valdez-Rodriguez. Alisa, welcome to Real Spiritual Talk Radio.
Thank you. I appreciate you giving me this opportunity.
Very glad to have you on here. So Alisa, typically what I do with my guests before we launch into their near-death experience, which is the meatier part of the conversation, I like to go backwards and get a little historical context concerning their prior religious belief systems. Did you have any religious beliefs growing up or prior to your near-death experience, at least?
I was not raised with religion per se. My parents were both academics, I guess. My mom's a writer like me, and my dad is a university professor of sociology and history and a self-defined materialist. So it was almost like laughed at in the house that I grew up in. They've both changed their tune now in their older age, but when I was a kid and when I was younger, they were very almost snarky and dismissive of religion generally. Neither of them had been raised much with religion. My father is from the nation of Cuba, and he was raised with some Santeria practices, which is this syncretistic religion that combines Catholicism with a West African religion of the Yoruba people. So he had a little bit of that and some of the superstitions around that. And he always told stories about seeing his mother's spirit after she died. So he had some kind of superstitious beliefs, I guess, but no use for religion at all. My mom was raised sort of Catholic and is very Catholic now, but I wasn't raised with anything like that.
So we're starting from a materialist background going into your near-death experience.
Yeah, and a really intolerant one too. You know, I think that my father especially was very dogmatic in his atheism. There was just no room for discussion. It was like you're either a smart person who believes in science or you're an idiot who believes in religion. And that's how I was raised.
Well, you certainly I guess after your experience could certainly prove him wrong here, at least to yourself. And with that said, why don't we go into your near-death experience, but why don't you describe to us first how it was actually triggered?
Yeah, so as you might imagine, growing up in a really dogmatic, inflexible, invalidating household, I had some issues, emotional mental health issues and things like that I didn't know about, an undiagnosed mental illness at the time, and was in an abusive relationship, and just had reached out to a doctor to get help, and he put me on a couple of medications rather than basically saying, get out of that abusive relationship. It's like, here, take these 2 pills that should never be taken together. I didn't know they should never be taken together. He should have known that. But I started taking them together. And what I later learned is those 2 drugs in combination can inspire suicidal ideation and behavior. And that's what happened. I sunk even lower and reached a point of where I just felt I couldn't tolerate the pain of my life anymore. And so I intentionally overdosed on a drug called Lamictal, which was one of the prescription drugs. I took 9 times the fatal amount of that drug at one time. I immediately regretted it and was telling my partner to please call 911. We were fighting at the time that I did this, and so he didn't believe me and was accusing me of being dramatic, didn't want to call the ambulance. And then I started to have seizures. I didn't want to die. Like it was just kind of an impulsive thing, and then I suddenly regretted it, and then I realized I'm probably gonna die. So he didn't call the ambulance. He said if I was so sick, he could take me to the hospital. So he drags me out of the house, and I was unable. They call it the exorcist drug. If you take too much of it, if you've ever seen The Exorcist, like the head spinning around and all that, that's kind of, I was just convulsing. So at that point, I was still in my body, but I was kind of experiencing what I was experiencing, but also standing a little bit to the side of it and watching it with great interest. Like I realized at that point I was two people, or two beings. There was my physical self, and then there was a spiritual self. And I was still alive. There was another part of me that was watching. And that was a really interesting experience, because it was this detached kind of just observation of what was going on. Whereas when it began, I was in this panic. And then I just kind of went into this other place. And by the time we got to my front yard, I was no longer able to walk or stand up. I just collapsed. And at that point, he did call 911. He finally believed me. And I remember I couldn't see anymore because your eyes shake. And I was just leaning up against the wall. He was holding my head up by a ponytail. He was a brutal person. I kept falling over, and I remember just holding my head up with the ponytail, and how much it hurt, but I couldn't control my body. I was there, and I was conscious. I could hear, I could see. I wanted to be able to move, but I couldn't move. The body was doing what it wanted. At that point, I hear the sirens finally coming, and I hear the paramedics. You hear the engine, and they're walking up with their radios and all of that. And they come and perform a sternal rub on me. I know some of your other guests have spoken about that. It's a thing that paramedics will do. It's supposed to be, I think, the most painful thing that you can endure without dying, and without doing permanent damage to someone. So a paramedic takes his fist and puts it on your sternum and presses as hard as he can and just rubs. And this hurts like hell, but I was not able to respond. So he's doing that, and I'm hearing him say unresponsive. I can feel them open my eyes and shine a light in. I see the light shining in, and I hear them say unresponsive. But I was there. I was in there, but they didn't know I was in there. And after that, I became aware of an entity, I would say, sitting to my left on the ground with me. And like other people say, I didn't see this thing with my senses, because I was no longer using the bodily senses. It was this other way of knowing. And I didn't just know that they were there. When you're in physical form, you interpret the world through your senses. But when you're in spirit form, you are separate from other things, but you get so much more information at once. So I didn't just get, like, if I'd been in physical form, I would see what that person looks like. I could maybe try to guess from their facial expression or whatever, what they feel or what their personality is like, getting to know them over time. But in this form, I instantly knew this person's personality, their intentions, their mood at the time, and what they wanted me to know. So it's not like mind reading. They can communicate what they want. And the sense I got was this was a male entity of some kind, very laid back, very kind, relaxed and funny. That's the part that I think gets lost in a lot of this, that there's this lightness to at least to what I went through, just this kindness that is not this cloying kind of, oh, sweet, treacly kindness. It's this almost Seinfeldian, like, just funny, like the way when those Seinfeld characters would walk into the room and they had that kind of attitude. That's what this was like. I'm like dying, but this thing is there, and he's like, hey, so I'm here, and you're about to fall over this way, and when your head hits the ground, you're going to go somewhere else. But it's okay, because you're not going to be alone. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And that happened. I fell to my side, my head hit the ground, and whoop, I was below the ground. And this is where my NDE, I've listened to a few since then, and mine seems to differ a little bit. So I have a theory about that. But I went down into the earth, but it was wide open. And it was kind of like what people describe as a void, only it was like a funnel, but a square funnel. So big square at the top, little square at the bottom, but huge. And I could look up or direct my attention up and see my yard still and see them working on my body. But I was floating down here, and I looked down and I see these two shapes beneath me. One is a cube, three-dimensional, and then the other is a cuboid, which is a rectangle that's three-dimensional. And they're both kind of orangish red. And I know that the cube is the being who was sitting next to me. but they're manifesting like that now. And so I look at them and they're like, hey, hi. I'm like, hello, am I dead? And they're like, yeah. I was like, okay. So, and I was still me, like I'm a wise ass, I'm a recovered journalist. I have a lot of questions. I'm a writer. So I was like, all right, cool. Is this where other people see a tunnel and light and dead relatives and Jesus and whatever? And they said, yeah. I was like, so why am I seeing you? And they told me, you are seeing us like this because the closest thing you had to a faith tradition when you were alive was a reverence for sacred geometry, which is true. I'm a musician. I was fascinated by fractals, the Fibonacci series, the golden ratio. And I used to tell people, if there is a God, the language of God is math. Because the code is all around us. Like you can just see the patterns and the consistency, regardless of scale. It fascinated me. It seemed too amazing to just be coincidence. So they humorously appeared to me as geometric shapes. And I was like, okay, that's cute. Also, I don't want to be here. I made a mistake. I want to go back. And they said, well, go ahead. And I could not move. I'm like, well, tell me how. And they said, we can't. I was like, that's not fair. You're telling me I can go back, but you won't tell me how. And they, before that happened, when we were having this, why am I seeing this conversation? I did ask them, who is right and who is wrong? Like I'm seeing this, other people see that. Everybody up there is fighting with each other about who's right and who's wrong about what happens like now. And their answer to me, and I say they, but it was really only the cube that was talking, the guy. The other one, I don't know what they were doing. They were. But the cubes basically said to me, nobody's right and nobody's wrong. And I remember thinking, that makes no sense. How is that true? And he said, I'll show you. And like that, we were somewhere else. And what I intuited from that was that whatever these beings thought, they were so disciplined in their thinking. Right thought is what they call it in Buddhism. They were so disciplined that they would think something and it would manifest in physical reality. So I'm suddenly, or in what seemed a dream state reality, something. I'm in the middle of a scene, a room. I cannot be seen by the people. There were 3 people in the room. And the 2 guides, I later learned they're my guides. They were with me and they couldn't be seen either. And it's like a play being acted out. There's a little girl sitting at a table. It's a little girl's room. And she's throwing a tea party for a bunch of teddy bears. And standing off to the side, watching her are her mom and dad, and they're arm in arm. It's like, oh, she's so cute. And little girl pours nothing into a cup, right? Because it's play. And then feeds it to an animal whose mouth doesn't open. And then sets it down. And I can feel her joy and love that she's being of service and caring about someone else. And she turns to her parents and she's like, Mommy, Daddy, look, Teddy loves the tea. The beings stopped this scene at that moment and asked me a question. They said, what does a good parent say? Now, I was a mother to an 11-year-old at that point, and being a parent was really important to me. So I think they picked their parable. I think it was a parable, with great intention, because I knew that a loving, caring parent does not tell a toddler, what do you mean your teddy bear loves the tea? There's nothing in that cup. That is not a real bear. You are stupid. That's mean. And so what I instantly understood from that was they are the parents. We are the kids. And playing tea party is religion or non-religion. It's your belief system when you're on this planet. That it did not matter whether there was tea or it was real. What mattered was what the intention was behind the actions. The little girl was being loving and kind. She was practicing being a good person, loving. She was practicing love and thoughtfulness and generosity, and sharing and joy. And I understood in that moment that whatever these beings were, I call it source now because I think the word God is so polluted at this point for so many people that we need another word that doesn't bring up all of that emotional trash for so many people. They love us, and they refer to themselves in the plural too, which is really interesting, that we are part of them. They are aspects of all of us, that we can be both individual and collective at the same time. And the message was, we don't care what game you're playing. You don't understand how it works yet. And that's okay, because your only purpose in your life is to be good. You're on earth in your form to learn to be kind and loving to each other. That's what we're worried about. So if you're doing that in the name of Allah, cool. If you're doing that in the name of Carl Sagan, cool. If you're doing that in the name of, Abraham and Moses, awesome. As long as you're nice, it does not matter. So that was a really important takeaway that I took from that, was we all need to stop fighting and saying, I'm right, you're wrong. And we need to look instead at what the system that we ascribe to is telling us to do to our fellow, not just people, but all life forms. That was another thing, like all life forms are divine. Trees, plants, all of it is our equal. So anyway, back to the NDE. I leave there and we're back in the void. And I'm like, okay, cool. I get that. Can I leave now? And they're like, go ahead. I still can't move. And at this point, I see around the top of the square is like an aquarium. It's really weird. It has manifested with all this pink liquid in it, like the water in it it's like a square aquarium. And I'm given to understand that pink liquid is the poison, because the pills were that color in my body. And they let me know, they said, well, if you can get yourself up there and break that glass, that poison will no longer affect you. And I was like, I do not know how to move. I really like to do that, because as cool as you guys are, I am not ready to stay here. And they said, okay, well, let's take you somewhere else where you can think about it. So bam, I'm in another place. This time it's still a square, kind of, this is like a whole theme through the whole thing. It's a hallway that's a square. And I am in that hallway with thousands of other shadow people. Some of them are gray. They look like the outline of a person. And some of them are light blue. And I am gray, but I know I need to be light blue. No idea what that means. And they're all just like trudging along together in this direction. And as they're all going, these little screens are appearing in front of them. And on those screens are all of their collected regrets. So I guess that's kind of like a life review. I don't know. But I'm walking on this and my little screen pops up. And I'm given another movie to watch and be inside of at the same time. So I'm both in this hallway moving with all of these people, and we're going counterclockwise for whatever reason. And I don't know what that place was. It's kind of like where you go if you don't know what you're doing to figure out where to go next. And I'm watching this movie, but I'm also inside the movie. And the movie is, my son was 11 at the time. And this movie is a high school boys' gymnasium locker room. And my son is there, and he's older, and he's in a basketball uniform with all of his teammates getting ready for a game. And my son is standing apart from all of the other kids. And and I'm feeling his feelings and everyone else's feelings. And I get the sense that he is so alone in the world. Like he just feels like the most isolated, alone, unloved person who's ever lived. And all of the other kids are like, they feel sorry for him because his mom's dead and because he's sad, but they don't know how to like reach across and help him. They want to, but they're also afraid of him. It's just like this weird thing. So they go down the hall out towards the basketball court, and I am my son. I'm feeling his feelings, but I'm also watching him from up here. He gets to the edge of the court and he looks out at the stands and sees his dad and stepmom, but doesn't see me. And that feeling like they're in some kind of playoffs and I'm not there. And he just falls on the ground. And I feel his despair, and they stop the little movie right there and they tell me, if you go through with this, you're going to teach him to go through with it. And that was unacceptable. That's the opposite of what we're supposed to do here. So I kind of understood in that moment, we hear that suicide is a sin. It is not a sin, I think, for the reason that people think it is, which is God gets to decide when you're going to die, not you. That's not it. It's that when it's naturally your time, the people around you, animals around you are ready because everything is connected. That it will be painful for them, yes, but if it is your time, they will be given the means to cope with it. But if it isn't your time, you're going to rip the fabric of what their life was supposed to be apart. So you're not just messing with the clockwork of your own life, you're messing with the clockwork of the other lives that depend on you and your mission that you're supposed to accomplish while you're here. And what I understood was my son would end up probably killing himself because the grief would be too much. And that's when they brought me back and they said, how about now? And at that point, I was like, bam, I could move. That reality and understanding that I, by hurting myself, was going to kill my own son was overwhelming. And I just knew I have to move. And so my will to go back was stronger than anything I've ever felt, because it encompassed the love I have for my son and the understanding that he needed me, to help him fulfill whatever his destiny is here. And so I went back. I went up, and I woke up in the ICU at that point. I had died about 6 different times. According to my medical record, I was revived numerous times in the ambulance. I also died in the ER waiting for a room. They just had left me on a stretcher, and my partner had to flag someone down, be like, she's not breathing, and then they put me on a ventilator. I was on a machine that was breathing for me. I had all kinds of problems. I should not have come back without brain damage, but I did. And I was heavily sedated. So I was in a medically induced coma because they were trying to balance out all the electrolytes and things that were all screwed up. And so I was heavily sedated, but I woke up. Like the second that I was like, I'm out of here, I woke up and they come in and I'm pulling the tube out of my lungs or my throat, the breathing tube. And they're like, how is that even possible? You're on so many drugs, you should not have been able to do that. And at that point, they strapped my arms down. They're like, this is weird. What was really cool about coming back, though, I made the decision to go back. And I remember before entering my body again, I was at the edge of a lake. And across the lake, there were these really pretty colored pebbles. And I knew that I had to go across that lake. And I was able to fly across that lake and then through a window. And when I woke up in the in the ICU, there was a painting in front of me on the wall, and it was that lake with those pebbles. And my eyes, I was in a coma. I was either non-responsive or in a coma. I was not able to see that, but the humor of the whole thing, they were kind of like, let's give her this experience so that she realizes, when she wakes up and sees that lake, I was just on that lake. Like there's so much magic and beauty and order to this that we have no understanding of. So even though it was a sad experience in a lot of ways, like I reached that point, I feel like I came back with a really important understanding of some things. that I've then later, these guides are still with me, and I realized they always had been. I just didn't know it. There had been little things that happened and, along the way that made me wonder. But then after the NDE, I really knew they were there. And this was in 2015. So for about the first 3 years, I had a lot of supernatural experiences after that happened. But they kept, I felt like whatever that channel was that was still slightly open was slowly closing, and I'm still able to access some of it, but I don't do it the way I did the first year or two, which was really actually mind-blowing. Yeah.
That, if I can say anything, that sounded like an extremely powerful experience you had there. Not only from understanding how the divine works, right? At the end of that, you talked about magic, and I think that's another word for that is the pure divinity that you experienced prior to coming back. You said something that was fascinating. A lot of people, a lot of near-death experiencers have what's called out-of-body experiences, where they're above their body in this aerial position looking down. But you said you were floating, but below your body. That's
below my body.
Yeah, that was kind of interesting to hear that someone had one where they're floating below their body versus above their body. I think, though, the most powerful aspect of your near-death experience were these lessons you learned, these parables. The girl feeding the doll with the tea, this tea party she's having with these toys, which represented how we all on planet Earth have different belief systems, and we're like children who believe different things. Some children believe Santa Claus, some children believe in the Easter Bunny. None of us are wrong as long as we're loving those children. And as you stated, we are loved. And so what we need to do is love one another the same way we're loved. One of the messages I got from that, just listening to you. And the other lesson, that the things we do in our lives completely, and we may not understand this, but they completely impact the lives of others. For example, your son, right? He may have ended up committing suicide had you not returned back from this because of the decision or it wasn't really a decision. I guess it was an accident, but right.
Yeah. And what's weird about it is he ended up playing basketball for a high school. I did not direct him towards that. I didn't even really talk about any of this with people for a while because of the way I was raised. It was like, did that really happen? Everyone's going to hate me if I talk about this. And I had the opportunity to look at the locker room, and it was the same. Like, there's just no way that was, the firing neurons of a dying brain or anything. How would I have known that? This is a school I had never set foot in. And much less in the boys' locker room. I would totally have been arrested. Like, that's just not even like a place I would have gone. So it was so weird and amazing.
Correct. Yeah. It's like people who see a grandparent that died before they were born, but yet they saw this grandparent in their near-death experience, came back, saw a picture of them, and said, "Mom, look, I saw that guy when I was wherever I was." And the parents, are in shock. There's no way you couldn't have seen him or her because they died before you were born. You're right. I agree. I think that's one of the strongest arguments for the spirituality of a near-death experience versus the dying brain theory that some materialists like to put forth.
That makes no sense. And, this might be controversial, but I think that in the past, when people were coming up with ideas of heaven and hell, there might have been people who had near-death experiences and came back and tried to communicate them without necessarily having the science or the language to understand it. I do think that my experience is what could be classified as hellish, but it wasn't painful and it wasn't bad. It was loving. It was still loving, but they really forced me to examine my behavior and how it impacts other people. Because I knew that funnel below, there was something underneath those floating shapes, was like a trapdoor. And I don't know what was below that, but they were giving me the opportunity to pause before I went wherever that would have taken me, to fix it. And they didn't just say, like, you screwed up, you better repent and fix it and make, feel terrible. They didn't do that. They were like, let us gently explain some things to you with great love and see how you feel about that afterwards, it was like school, emotional school, which I appreciated. I think that it was very loving. And I'm not saying that's everybody's experience, but that might explain why I was down instead of up, and why it was dark instead of light. It was all of those things, and they appeared red. We associate red and darkness with hell, and but it wasn't. And that hallway with all those beings, that was a very unhappy place. Like, everybody in there was kind of like filled with regret. I knew that, but I feel like everybody was also kind of like being given a second chance to figure it out. And that goes along with it, right? If you are love, you don't get anything. The source wouldn't get any benefit out of punishing people. The source doesn't want to punish. Source is love. The desire to punish and get revenge and all of that, that's very human. We say, man is made in the image of God, but it's the other way around. People have created a God in the image of human beings.
Going back to what you said about having a hellish experience, interestingly enough, I've always had the theory that the reason why a lot of these near-death experiencers who do have what can be described as hellish experiences, and I have heard some hellish ones, believe me, from fire to demonic or evil forces dragging someone the other way around across a room. I come to realize that a lot of the things that they're telling me that they were doing or treating other people, and more importantly, treating themselves, I do believe a lot of those are lessons, right? They're lessons for them to come back, to change whatever maladaptive behavior or thoughts that you've put out there into the world, so that not only you can make it a better world for others, because there's a ripple effect that many people talk about. And I think that's what we saw in yours. If you were there for your son, your son also would have went on to prosper, as obviously he did after you returned from your near-death experience.
Yeah. And he's great. He's almost finished with college now. He ended up being a National Merit Scholar and got a full scholarship to college, and he's an amazing person. I don't think that would have happened if I went through with what I went through. They also told me this, as far as what do you see when you get to the other side. They said everyone sees what they need to see to feel comfortable. So that's interesting too. Like, if you are raised, I was thinking, if you were raised in this fire and brimstone kind of world and you're expecting to be punished, and you'll be very, very uncomfortable and weirded out if you're not for a minute, that might be what people are shown. And then they're like, hey, not really. Let's go to this next place, because it keeps moving. That's the other thing that I was given to understand, which is the only unchangeable thing in all of the universe is change. So there is no static heaven. We're not like in this life and then we're going to go somewhere else and be there forever. Matter, including our consciousness, is constantly moving and changing and growing and learning, because source is really curious. That was the other thing I was given to understand, is these beings who are my guides, and they're still here. They're right here. They basically let me know that they are an aspect of me in the same way that I am, that a leaf would be part of a tree and it can fall off, but it's still part of a tree. They're the branch that I came from. And that if you follow them far enough, you get to the next branch, and then the trunk and the roots and the earth, and it's all one thing. Yeah.
You are a writer. You've written novels. You've worked for newspapers. Have you ever considered writing about your near-death experience and putting it out there for the rest of the world to hear?
I'm finally thinking about it. I wanted to a few years ago, and the New York publishing world that I come out of, or was in at the time, my agent, he's no longer my agent, but my agent at the time, I told him the idea and he said, oh, no, absolutely not. You can't do that. People will think you're crazy. It will ruin your career. And that was super hurtful because I get it. I get that that's probably true for some people. But like, why? And this is a religious man, like in a traditional sense. Like, why is he, able to believe whatever he believes without ever having personally experienced it? But because millions of other people believe it, that's normal. And then I actually went somewhere and had this experience that I can't prove to him, but it was realer than real. So I finally am in a place where I don't really care anymore. If I feel like I was given the gift of writing, it's not mine. And that's something else. Before the near-death experience, when I was writing and I was in the zone and I was, doing what I was supposed to be doing, all these coincidences would happen in my life around the writing. Like strange things that I now know. Some people call them God winks or signposts. And I feel like writing is not mine. Writing is my obligation. Stories are not mine. I'm receiving them. That's the other thing. I was like, I asked them, how is the body able to be me? And I'm also not in my body anymore. I'm also me. And they showed me a cell phone, like the image of just like a cell phone. And then I understood from that the personality is in a cloud and that this is a receiver and a transmitter, the brain, that the electrical stuff, we don't really even understand what that is, but it's something to do with DNA and the code of your specific DNA that receives and transmits your specific consciousness. That was amazing to me. And then I also was like, well, there are millions of us dying right now, and you're able to be here and source is able to be here present with me. How does that work? And they showed me a word, and the word was Google. I'm like, right, I'm doing my Google search. 40 million other people are doing their Google search, and we're all getting our specific answers to our search. And because Google is that big, Google has that much processing capacity to be able to be specific to me. They can know where I'm going. They can know when my email comes in and all this, and they're still also doing that for you. That's what Source is, but like so much bigger even than that. It's this vast intelligence. The entire universe is a consciousness.
I understand that you originally said that when you came back, you didn't really tell anyone. Being that your father specifically was a hardcore materialist, did you muster up any courage to let him know if he was around?
I did not for a long time. I was afraid because he was also, throughout my life, very intolerant, kind of a clinical, narcissistic type personality where if you don't agree with him, I disagreed with him when I was 16 and his response was to throw me out forever. He did that to my mother. He did that to my brother. So I just was like, he can't handle someone not parroting or mirroring exactly his beliefs. I had no choice but to tell a new boyfriend. I got rid of the awful one. Found a new awful one. No, he wasn't that bad. But we went camping, and this was about 6 months after this. I went camping with this photographer in the Lincoln National Forest, darkest night of the year, because he wanted to do one of those night sky time lapse. I don't know. But I'm in the tent sleeping, and it's freezing because it's winter, and there's no one at that campground. And he keeps waking me up, coming in and out of the tent. And then I wake up this other time and I go outside and he's not there. There's a little kid standing there in shorts and a little scarf. It's a little boy and he's looking up at me. I'm like, and I just knew it was like one of those instant downloads. I knew he was 8 years old. I knew he was scared. I kind of thought he was a Boy Scout just because of the way he was dressed. I was confused. And he asked me telepathically, "Are you a mommy?" I'm like, yeah. And he said, okay, good, because my mommy told me I can only talk to other mommies on this trip. And I was like, what trip? And he's like, I just want to go home. Can you help me get home? And I'm like, I don't know where your home is. And then he starts showing me things. It's kind of a long story. I won't give all the details, but there were all of these specific clues, like 4 numbers were floating over his head and they were 1983. So I thought 1983. And then I saw like what happened to him, which is that his throat was slit while he was eating lunch out of a little wax paper, like a sandwich or something. It was very strange. And it was so vivid that I woke up and I was this was like something that happened to me while I was asleep, but it took place in that area. So I woke up and told my boyfriend, I'm a little bit freaked out. And we left at 4 a.m. I became obsessed with figuring out who this kid was. We lived together, me and this guy, and I'm Googling all the time. He's like, you know what? You're scaring me. Are you going to just go kill yourself again to save this kid? Like, he got very uncomfortable with it. And I said, no, I need to know this is real. I am telling you, this is real. I feel it in my soul. I couldn't find anything until I finally inverted some of the numbers and made it 1893. And then up pops this picture and this story in that area of a little kid with his dad. His dad was the Alfred Jennings Fountain, I think is his name. The little boy was Henry Fountain. The guy was a prosecutor in the time of Billy the Kid from down by Las Cruces, New Mexico. And there was a cattle rustling outfit up by Lincoln, where we were. And they were going on trial, but none of the local prosecutors would take it because back in those days, gangs of cattle rustlers were like the really bad guys. They were scary. They would kill you. So they asked this guy from down there if he'll take the case. And he says yes. And his wife says, this is dangerous. So take Henry with you because no self-respecting man will kill a father in front of his son. And so she sends him with his 8-year-old son. And they go, he prosecutes the case. These guys are tried, they're convicted, they're put in jail. And he gets on his stagecoach and starts heading back. It's a couple days trip. And he never makes it. And they find the stagecoach out in White Sands, all covered with blood. They never found the bodies. And I didn't know any of this. I knew none of this. That little kid, and it made perfect sense where he's like, I've been waiting here for a mommy in the middle of nowhere. Because my mom told me I can only, he wanted to go home. That was just like, for me, that was more proof that whatever had happened to me, this was real. How do you explain that?
Well, most people can't or probably won't. But I think this serves as a testament, not only to the lessons you learned about love, but about how after effects are very powerful after a near-death experience.
Yeah, and I could see, or not see, but intuit color on people, which then, later understood to be aura. And that's like a warning system. Like there were people in my life who I thought were good, and then like one of them had just like this jagged Bart Simpson hair aura that was like the ugliest shade of mucus green. And I'm like, that guy is not good. And it turned out he was a terrible person. I can kind of feel energy off of people now. But yeah, those things have closed down a bit, although I think that's because of me not wanting it. Like, I just don't want it. I don't know what to do with it.
I have heard people have really strong after effects. They can hear other people's conversations. They can almost hear each other people's thoughts. As you said, hear auras. There's precognition. There's higher levels of empathy, and definitely the lack of the fear of death. Where are you with that?
I do not fear death. I don't want to leave yet. Like I feel like I feel very intuitive about some things. So I kind of feel like I'm not ready yet. And I've been really sick. I'm one of these people who got COVID and never got better. Like I've had long COVID for 3 years. It's been one terrifying health scare after another. And part of me is like, is this it? Am I leaving now? Because I don't feel like I've done what I'm everything I'm supposed to do yet. And I'm not dead yet. So, but yeah, I'm not really afraid of it at all. I just want to make sure that I learn what I'm supposed to learn, because clearly I didn't the last time. I still was kind of not really ready. And I think a part of that is being able to acknowledge and admit what happened to me. Not that I'm proselytizing or anything, but I do think there's a responsibility that if you're given the gift of being able to see beyond that curtain, and if even if whatever I learned, it sounds grandiose because I don't really think I necessarily have the power to change anybody, but if there's one person who hears this and they're like, you know what, I'm going to stop being terrible to somebody because they don't agree with me, that would be good. Like right now, I think the biggest problem our society, at least in the US, is facing is this false binary in everything. You know, it's like good versus evil, right versus left, blue versus red. I'm right, you're wrong. And it's just this and capitalism kind of plays on that, especially with the media. They're like, let's get people really angry and make them think everyone's out to get them, and everyone will be fighting, and they'll tune in because it's addictive. You know, being angry and hateful and like terrified is addictive. And our society is so steeped in that right now that nobody's hearing each other. And it's so sick, you know, it's just so terrible for the soul of the nation, for everybody involved in it. Because, you know, what if we could just say, you know what, I don't believe what they believe. That's not my reality, but it's theirs, and that's okay. Like, well, how hard would that be if we could all just be like, you know what, totally respect you. And if we all respected each other and didn't have to change anybody's mind, what a lovely world it would be, you know. I don't know.
Yes, I am certainly one who loves to promote peaceful coexistence and the acceptance of diversity. You have to understand,
Yes.
people will always be different from you in terms of the way they look, the way they dress, the way they think, what they believe in. But if we can coexist peacefully and go back to the lessons that you learned in your near-death experience, just to be kind, to be good to one another, that it doesn't matter what the differences of their beliefs are, certainly this could be a much better world. And I don't mean to sound cliche, but literally it would be.
Yeah. And for people, the most curious thing is people who purport to believe in God and yet hate other people based on them looking different. Your God created that person too. So anytime you hate one of God's creations, you hate God. Like it's or when you destroy the ecosystem that you depend on to survive, that's so beautiful and took millions of years to just be perfectly balanced and have everything that anything in that ecosystem needs. It's such an affront to source itself to beauty and wisdom. And so much damage is being done in the name of religion that has absolutely nothing to do with love, which is what source is. It's distressing and sad and unnecessary more than anything. We're all kind of suffering needlessly. I have gravitated towards Buddhism. After this, I started doing some spiritual seeking. I like the Unitarian Universalists too, because I think they capture, they're a Christian denomination technically, but they're also wide open to non-belief, to any belief. You come as you are, and they, you know, bring the beauty and traditions of every religion, really, and non-religion, science, everything. They just try to find this thread of beauty. So I really like them. And I really like the messages of Buddhism. I think the Buddha was very close to figuring this out. The main tenet being that pain and loss are inevitable. If you are alive, whether you're a tree, you're a person, hamster, whatever, you're going to hurt and you're going to lose. You're going to lose things around you. You're going to lose your own life. That's how this works. It's all getting recycled all the time. So Pain and loss are inevitable. However, suffering is optional. Suffering is when we resist a painful thing or a loss that we are powerless to change. That's when your pain becomes suffering, because you start to tell yourself this second story about it. I'll give you a simple example. You're married to somebody you love, they fall in love with someone else, they want a divorce. That is painful. That's terrible, and that's loss. If you resist that, you cannot change that person. They are done. They do not want to be with you anymore. They have found someone else. They have moved on. You can feel your pain, go through it, accept the loss. And it sucks. But if you feel that pain and you're like, no, 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 and you hang onto their ankles and don't let them leave, and you stalk them and you try to change everything about yourself. Oh, I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to do everything. I'm going to win them back. That's suffering. That is something that we do to ourselves with the story we tell ourselves around the painful thing. And I think a lot of Western belief systems don't deal with pain and loss at all. They kind of push it aside, and they're kind of like, if you do X, Y, and Z, you'll never feel those things. And then you'll go to this wonderful place where everything's perfect forever and ever. That is not what enlightenment is. And in fact, you cannot really love if you're unable to hurt or lose. For instance, your kid, my son, he grows up and he has to be on his own. The day your child moves out to be on their own is so painful, and it's such a loss. But if you were to force them to remain with you, that's not love. That's crazy, right? So I don't know. I think Buddhism is fantastic. It has been fantastic for me in helping me to understand how to be comfortable with groundlessness, how to be at peace with not knowing what's going to happen next. And that's faith. Faith is not, oh, if I do the right things, then God will be nice to me and give me my allowance. Faith is, even if the bad things happen, it's supposed to be this way right now. If I can't change it, there are bad things that happen or painful things that happen that you can change. Let's say you have broken your leg, right? You don't want to just be like, I'm going to accept this painful thing so I don't suffer. You can change that. You can go get a cast and fix your leg. I'm talking about the painful things we cannot change, that we accept them. That's been such a gift to be able to realize enlightenment is not bliss. It's not sitting in absolute bliss at the top of a mountain. It's watching the storm rage around you and still having equanimity, like being calm, being able to say this too belongs, you know?
Well, you used the word enlightenment, and I must say, I think I was enlightened today, and I believe many people watching this interview will also be enlightened. And with that said, Alisa, I want to thank you for coming on Real Spiritual Talk Radio and sharing with us your absolutely fascinating account.
Thank you for giving me the chance to share it. And keep up the good work. You're doing amazing things here.
Well, I thank you very much, and I sure hope so. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, Alisa Valdez-Rodriguez.